Well, there's one more thing for us to cover, because we realized in majority of cases, the adapter is going to be connected to some type of database. And the operations which it does are very similar. The only difference would be maybe for you, it's going to be MySQL database, and for somebody else, it's going to be Amazon DynamoDB. Right? So we decided to create a module which is called BSS adapter ExternalDB. So it makes your life a bit easier. So you don't have to override the actual logic of doing authentication. The only thing you need to override is provide the modules which extract the information from your specific DB instance. So what we have here, BSS adapter ExternalDB is derived from BSS adapter class, and there's just a bit improved OTP handler module, right? So the one which we looked before, it was just had virtual methods which you have to override, and this one actually does the real OTP generation. Okay, so but the most important thing is here. So this object would have attributes: database of users, database of sessions, and database of generated one-time passwords. And these would be by default unknown, but when you will override this class, you will have your own constructor which will actually initialize them with the proper objects. And these modules, these methods, name and version, you still have to provide them because we don't know which system you are connecting to. Get capabilities, same thing. We don't know what your adapter is capable of. So here you will return a list of functionality which your adapter supports. For instance, does it support retrieval of contacts? Does it support retrieval of XDRs? Does it support retrieval of call recordings and so on? And so here we assume that this kind of a business logic, for instance, method authenticate, what it does, it tries to retrieve user information based on the login. If the user is found, it attempts to verify password for the user, and if everything's fine, it creates a new session and returns it. Otherwise, it raises an exception. Right? So this method authenticate, most likely you don't have to change it in your subclass. The only thing you need to do, or well, maybe you need to override find user by login in case if in your database user login is not a primary key, right? Maybe you have primary key, it's some integer number, but we have to look by a different field, right? So then you will override this lookup method, and maybe you will need to override a verify password method, because now it just tries to see if the object returned from your database has attribute password and compares it. But maybe, again, in your case, it's going to be a bit more complex. And same thing when we get information from a database, again, what would be the actual user ID, in which attribute does it reside? We don't know yet, so we try to make some guesses, but in case if our guess is not right, you may need to override this particular method. And similar to method which is used for authentication, there is a retrieve user method. This is when user already authenticated, got access token, and then later on WebTrit backend tries to get user data, SIP username, password, and other settings. So this is the default implementation. It just from the object which you provided, which implements interface to your database. And in other examples, I'll show it doesn't have to be a real database. It can be something which actually issues REST API, HTTP API request to external system, as long as we can retrieve some data. So we retrieve user object from the database, then we call a function which converts the object in your database into a user object, which is recognized by the adapter and complies with WebTrit schema, and that's it, otherwise we raise an error. Retrieve contacts and retrieve calls, they are a bit more complex. They're a bit more complex to implement some kind of generic framework for doing this. So this is why we don't have it here, but you get the idea. And when we will be covering specific examples, we have examples for FreePBX, 3CX, and a few other systems, you will see how these can be used.